Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are taking an incredible journey through a truly fascinating chapter on our very own origins, the epic story of human evolution. I am so pumped to guide you through this material, because we're not just going to recite some dry facts. Instead, we're doing a detailed page-by-page analysis of our source text, using these vibrant animations to unpack exactly how we went from microscopic cells to the bipedal thinkers we are today. Let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First up, grasping deep evolutionary time. Then Darwin, DNA, and change. After that, we'll explore the primate family tree, look at the shift to bipedalism, and finally, meet the early hominids. All right, kicking things off with part 1, grasping deep evolutionary time. Just take a second and wrap your mind around that number, 4.6 billion. That is the estimated age of the Earth in years, with the earliest animate matter showing up around 3.5 billion years ago. The source actually notes that the human mind genuinely struggles to comprehend deep time on this kind of massive scale. I mean, we're so used to dealing with time in minutes, days, or, maybe a century at most. But evolutionary changes, the kind that literally result in entirely new species, those unfold over hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. So to really understand evolution, we first have to accept that the canvas it paints on is just unimaginably vast. Moving right along to section 2, Darwin, DNA, and change. So how did we even begin to figure this vast history out? Well, it basically started with a massive 19th century scientific showdown. On one side, we have Chevalier de Lamarck. Now, this French scientist made the crucial leap that species do change, which was huge. But his proposed mechanism? Totally scientifically incorrect. He basically thought that if an animal used a body part a lot, it got bigger, and then it passed that exact bigger part to its offspring. It's kind of like imagining a bodybuilder passing down giant biceps directly to a baby. Then along comes Charles Darwin in 1859 with The Origin of Species, completely transforming our understanding. Darwin realized that species actually evolve due to minor, inherited variations among individuals, and those tiny changes accumulate over countless generations. The really crucial point here is how nature actually does the choosing. Darwin's theory implies natural selection, which we all famously know as the survival of the fittest. But hold on, it's important to remember that a variation shouldn't be thought of as some universal improvement. Not at all. A variation is only successful if it results in a more efficient adaptation to a very specific changing environment. If a minor change helps an organism survive and compete for resources right then and there, it lives to reproduce. If it doesn't, well, that genetic line simply ends. And modern molecular biology absolutely proves Darwin right, while revealing a level of complexity he honestly couldn't have even imagined. Our source uses this mind-boggling metaphor to show just how much data is constantly being stored and replicated. DNA is this massive, microscopic storehouse of information. Evolution happens because, over millions of years and millions of self-replications, there are these tiny, occasional errors, mutations. Those microscopic copying errors, they provide the raw variations that natural selection acts upon. But hey, science itself is always evolving, right? The text highlights a fascinating debate regarding the actual pace of evolution. Darwin envisioned very slow, continuous, and gradual changes. But then paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould looked closely at the fossil record and saw something entirely different. He noted these significant gaps and proposed that evolution might actually feature long periods of basically no change at all, interrupted by short phases of rapid, bursting evolutionary activity. So was it a slow, steady march or a series of rapid sprints? Science is actually still trying to figure that one out. Okay, let's jump into section 3, the primate family tree. Seriously, take a second and just look at your own hands right now. The treats you possess were originally designed for an arboreal habitat, meaning living high up in the trees. Prehensile hands and feet for grasping branches, flattened nails instead of digging claws, and of course, those incredible opposable thumbs that let you fully enclose an object. Add in stereoscopic vision, those forward-facing eyes that allow us to beautifully gauge distance and depth, and you have an animal that is perfectly adapted to confidently leap from branch to branch. As the primate order branched out, a really critical anatomical divide occurred. Our source makes a fascinating distinction between two suborders here. The more primitive Prosimii, like lemurs, have eyeballs located in a restrictive, ring-like bone structure. But the Anthropoidea suborder, which includes monkeys, apes, and us, developed bowl-like eye sockets. This might seem like a small architectural shift in the skull, but it gave our ancestors far greater freedom of vision, which was an absolutely incredible advantage for survival. Which brings us to section 4, the shift to bipedalism. About 30 million years ago, apes first emerged. But here's a startling fact brought to light by modern molecular biology. Humans are vastly closer, genetically speaking, to African apes like gorillas and chimpanzees than we are to Asian apes. Looking at the timeline, we see that around 15 million years ago, African and Asian apes split. And then, much more recently in the grand scheme of things, about 7 million years ago, the very first bipedal hominids branched off from those African apes. Now, this completely upends an old assumption, one that even Darwin himself held. For a long time, scientists just assumed that walking on two legs and developing a massive brain had to have happened at the exact same time. But the fossil record proves otherwise. Bipedalism came first. There's a staggering gap of at least 3 million years where our ancestors were walking around fully upright before we see any vital increase in brain size. We essentially mastered the ground mechanically long before we mastered it intellectually. And let me tell you, mastering the ground mechanically was no small feat. Bipedal locomotion required a total head-to-toe biomechanical re-engineering. It's so complex. Your feet had to change to carry your entire body weight. Your pelvis had to widen into a box shape to anchor massive new leg muscles. Your spine literally had to invert from an ape-like C curve to a human S curve. Because think about it, without that adjustment, the sheer weight of the chest would make an upright animal fall flat on its face. Even the rib cage shifted from a funnel to a cylinder just for better balance. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5. Meet the early hominids. Digging into the source material, there was a monumental breakthrough back in 1924. A researcher named Raymond Dart discovered a fossil in South Africa and labeled it Australopithecus, meaning southern ape. This was the genus that first truly separated from the apes by possessing the ability to walk upright on its two lower limbs, firmly placing the cradle of our earliest origins right there in Africa. When researchers looked closer at later fossil finds, they uncovered this really complex family dynamic. Different species living side by side, adapting to entirely different diets. Just look at the profound physical differences here. Australopithecus africanus had a rounded skull and likely an omnivorous diet. But its cousin, Australopithecus robustus, it went a completely different route. It developed massive flat cheek teeth and literally grew a bony crest on top of its skull just to anchor huge jaw muscles. It was perfectly adapted for grinding up tough, fibrous plant foods. That is evolution in action, tailoring anatomy directly to the environment. But if we want to find the earliest known species of homininae, we have to go further back. The text highlights Australopithecus afarensis, discovered in Ethiopia and dating back roughly 4 million years. Afarensis is a true transitional marvel. The fossils show the final stages of the shift to bipedalism. They definitely had an erect posture, but their limbs still held onto a few ape-like traits, like slightly curved fingers and a conical thorax. They are literally the living bridge between our arboreal past and our bipedal future. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really profound thought established right at the beginning of our source text. For 4.6 billion years, biological natural selection was the only game in town. But with the emergence of humans, a qualitatively new situation arose. We are no longer just subject to nature. We manipulate it. Our tools, our societies, our interventions, they all imply cultural adaptation. So if biological evolution brought us all the way from single cells to bipedal thinkers, are we now driving our own evolution completely outside the bounds of biology? It is a fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through our deep past.